Matthew chapter 13. So we're going to pick up from there. If you remember, we just finished Matthew 12. And before we get started, just want to remind you guys where we're at, right? We were at the part where this is where the ministry for Jesus is really starting to turn. Before this, everyone loved him. Everybody. Pharisees, Levites, regular people, everybody loved Jesus. They thought he was the cat's meow. Everywhere he was going, things were happening. And now, suddenly, because he's becoming too popular, the Pharisees are starting to turn on him. And now they're starting to try and trick him and plot against him. And they're trying to find ways to get rid of him. And so when we finished chapter 12, we just finished the first time that Jesus kind of came up against one of these adversaries. And so Jesus he's having to start to deal with this. And then he has this to say. And I was thinking about this this morning. I always say how I'm excited about this, and it's always true. But one of the things, this is definitely, I think, my favorite parable that Jesus tells. This is here at the beginning of Matthew chapter 13. This is one that's been on my heart for decades at this point. Like this is one that's always just stuck with me. And so let us read it together here this morning. It says, that same day, the day that Jesus was tested by the Pharisees, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and he sat in it. And while all the people stood on shore, he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering some seed, some fell along the path. The birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil, so it sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seeds fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 160 or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has the ears, let them hear. This is one of those interesting. This is actually and part of the reason I really like this parable. This is actually one of the rare instances when Jesus actually bothers to explain his parable. But I love what he has to say here. And this one, and as I said, this one has stuck with me for many, many, many years. And this has been one that I've wrestled with for decades, because I've always wondered why Jesus said it in the way that he said it, and why Jesus said it when he said it. Right? We've talked about that a lot before. Context is key. We have to understand, and there's a reason why I always try and start my sermon and give you guys a little bit of context of where we just were, because that's going to help to inform us about what's going on and why this story is coming up now. If you remember, he just talked about the unforgivable sin. He talked about how people are going to have to face judgment, and how people were giving credit to Satan for the power of God, that when Jesus was driving out demons, they said, oh, he did so by the power of the devil. And Jesus went so far as to say, that is unforgivable. For you who knows better, right? This was key. For you who knows better, to give credit to the enemy, what your Lord has done is disgusting and out of place. And then after he has this big confrontation, this big blow up, he goes out and he tells people this story about sowing seed. And you might think, well, what is going on now? Does anyone here like to garden? Yeah, we got. You love to garden? Very good. One of the cool things about gardening, and this is one of the things, I was thinking about this actually a lot this morning. I thought, I wonder if my obsession with this particular parable is what actually got me into gardening and thinking about this. But for those of you who are familiar with gardening, even if you're not familiar with gardening, you'll know this first part really easy, right? If I go and scatter some seed out on that concrete path up front, what's going to happen? The birds get fat, right? Like, that's what happens. Right? There's no soil. There's nothing for it to set roots in. There's nothing for it to grow. It doesn't have anything that it needs, and so it dies. Right? It is completely worthless. Why? Because the ground is too hard, compacted. There's no way that the poor little seeds have a chance at getting through all that callus. On the second one, he talks about falling amongst the rocky soil. So this is just like bad dirt. And many of us have seen this. In fact, what likes to grow in bad dirt? That's right. I didn't catch who said that. I think it was Carol. Weeds. Weeds love growing in bad dirt. Right? Weeds love it. Why? And it's one of those things, I remember seeing this before, and I do agree with this. People say, we call them weeds because they're a nuisance. But at the end of the day, that's who Christians ought to be, because they're the ones that you can't get rid of. They just keep springing up in the most unlikely places. But weeds are constantly getting in the way, and so in these rocky places where and the reason why it's so difficult for many plants, like if I'm planting my tomatoes and I go out and I plant my tomatoes in rocky soil, well, my tomato plants, my poor little tomato plants, don't stand a chance because their little roots can't deal with the bad soil. And so maybe because there is a little bit of soil and there's enough moisture and heat, and the little sprout will come up and it'll bloom and it'll look good for a moment. But then, of course, life happens and it dies. There's not enough. And then it talks about the thorns. Has anyone here ever grown a garden and decided, I don't want to grow it anymore? What immediately happens to your garden? It gets overrun with weeds. And what happens to all those plants that you planted that once they get covered in weeds? What ends up happening? Yeah, they die. They choke them out. Why? Because they're competing for resources. They're competing for resources like space so that they can grow. They're competing for sunlight. They're competing for things like nitrogen in the soil. There's all this competition for the same resources, and there's a very limited amount. And the weeds are so good and so effective in growing in cramped spaces that they'll expand out and choke out anything else that's living around it. One of the weeds, of course, that we love is the hostis, because it's basically a weed, let's face it, but it's a weed we like, so we let it grow. And it's just like that. It crowds out everything around it. It covers it. Has anyone ever noticed, has anyone here got a walnut tree around their house? You know what's interesting about a walnut tree? Nothing grows around the walnut tree, just grass. If you've ever, next time you see a walnut tree, you're going to notice and you're going to pay attention. You'll be like, hey, yeah, there are no other trees around the walnut tree. Why not? Because walnuts fall down from the walnut tree all the time. Why wouldn't other walnut trees grow near a walnut tree? It's because they poison the soil around them. They're competing for the resources, and they're crowding out everything else so that way they can be the only thing. Right? And this is exactly the type of thing that Jesus is getting at. And then sometimes, if I go out and I decide I'm going to grow my tomatoes, what am I going to do? I'm going to carefully prepare the bed. I'm going to make sure the soil is just right. It's got to be packed down a little bit, but not too much. If it's too compact, then it's going to, the water can't get in, the roots can't grow. But if it's too loose, then it's just all going to wash away. So you gotta take care of it, and you cultivate it, and you have good soil. And then that way, if you have good soil, and you take care of it, then you end up with a beautiful harvest months later. It takes time, but you end up with a beautiful, bountiful harvest, where from one little seed, you get tons and tons of fruit. So the disciples hear this in verse 10 and say, why do you speak in parables? What do you mean, Jesus? Why do you say it like this? And he replied, because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has been or has will be given more, and they will have abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. This is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. And this comes to us from Isaiah chapter 6, 9, verses 10. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's hearts have become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears. They have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and in turn, I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears for they hear. For truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. Listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of his life and deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop yielding 160 or 30 times what was sown. Okay. I said this to Rebecca. It's one of the things that I notice. I think this is a well-known parable, an oft misunderstood one, and not a very popular one that we like to apply to our own lives. For a few reasons. Number one, all of us know people like the first like the path. Life happens. Stuff happens in our lives, and we go out, we live, and things happen, and we allow ourselves, if we're not careful, we call it today jaded, but in the Bible he refers to it as a calloused heart. We allow ourselves to become hard, no longer soft and caring. We're no longer capable of interacting and meeting with people in the ways that Jesus intended. We completely seal ourselves off because either we're afraid of being hurt or we've been hurt in the past, and so we completely harden our hearts so that one day when someone shows up and they offer us the hope of Jesus Christ and they tell us about the good news of Jesus Christ, it might have been, you might as well have skipped a stone across the water. It just completely skims off. The enemy comes and snatches it away, and it makes no difference whatsoever. Right? We all know people like this. The second person, much the same. Many of us can probably identify people in our own lives that are like this, where they hear the word of God and they go, yes, this is so good. This news is so good. How come not everybody has heard this? And they get so excited and passionate, and then the first little speed bump in life happens. And they go, wait a minute. If God was so good, why did this happen? And their faith has no root. It has no substance. And so that first little hiccup, that first little problem in their life completely sidelines them, and they completely abandon their faith. The third, I think, is the most dangerous, because the third hides among us. See, the third is this. It's the people who think they're Christian. They go to church. They do the church things. Maybe they go to the church picnic. They go and do all the events, and they do these things, and they're having fun with church people. But they've also allowed all of the stuff of the world to come in with them. And unfortunately, not just Christians, but actual churches in and of themselves are letting people in. Do you really think that people aren't hungry for truth? Like, I remember hearing people when I was in Bible college, and they were saying, one of the professors asked, why do you think churches are shrinking? And I'll never forget, one person said, well, because people just aren't interested in spiritual things. Now, who here has been to Toronto within the last few years, right? Actually, Lauren, you mentioned this, your last trip to the United States that you went on. And it's the same thing I noticed when I was in Toronto. You walk one city block, you're going to see psychics. You're going to see all kinds of different spiritual things all in a huge strip. Why? Because it's not that people aren't hungry for it. They're starving for it. The problem is they want something substantial. But here's the thing. We're a culture that's got hooked on junk food. right? And so we like it because it tastes good in the moment, but it's not good for us in the long term, right? And that's often a lot of these things that we allow to incorporate into our lives, into our churches. We bring these things in and we say, well, I like this thing, so I want to carry it with me, and I'm going to carry it with me right into the church. And Jesus, if you don't let me keep it, well, I don't know how good this is going to be, because I want my Bible to justify my position that I already have. And we do this over and over and over again. Sometimes we don't even mean to do it. That's the worst part. It can be an accident. We accidentally bring things with us, bring in our baggage, instead of asking ourselves, what does the Bible say? What we'll say is, right, we'll say, does the Bible condemn this thing that I like to do? And then we'll try and find a way to rationalize it, right? This is we're so good at this. Human beings are so good at this. We'll say, yeah, the Bible is true, and then we'll find a way to rationalize what we want. Instead of saying, is this what God wants for us? Is this what God wants from us? And asking, wait a minute, am I doing what was intended? And unfortunately, this is why we see so many churches close. Because how many of you, think about last Monday. Monday was a hot day. Imagine someone came up, John, and they put a nice glass of iced tea right in front of you. It's got a little wedge of lemon. It's looked nice, got some ice cubes in it. Probably looking forward to it, right? And then you go and you take a drink of it, and you go, it tastes like water. It tastes like water with a little bit of color. What is wrong with this? And it's because this is exactly what we've done in a lot of our churches too. We keep watering down our Christianity and say, well, we'll just thin it out, we'll spread it out. And the worst part is that it happened with the best of intentions. Right? It happened, there was this big movement about 20 years ago that got started where we were desperately trying to reach people for Christ, and so we started to compromise, and that's the issue right there. You can't compromise. You can't compromise on truth. It's either true or it's not. But we did. People compromised in order to bring people into the church. And then when you start bringing people into the church, more and more compromise was necessary in order to keep them in the church. And then as that's been going on, of course, people are drinking it going, this is terrible, and they're getting rid of it. There's a reason why there's things like the Orthodox Church are growing. There's reasons why more mainline Bible-believing churches, these are the churches that grow because they're the ones that hold to the truth. They're not willing to compromise in what they believe in. Why? Because they are the last type of soil, carefully cultivated, carefully managed, carefully nurtured. And who here, as we talked about before, likes to plant a garden? You go out, you plant your peppers, and you go, great. Now that I've prepared the soil and I've planted my peppers, I never have to touch it again. Isn't that right, Carol? No. That's the problem, and this is the thing. This is how we often like to treat our faith as well. Hey, I came to the altar, I gave my heart to God, and now everything's right? No. Every day I go back out to those garden beds, and I'm weeding away. I'm cultivating the soil. I'm making sure it doesn't get packed down too hard, especially after a hard rain. You don't want it to get too much compaction. You got to carefully nurture that if you want to have good fruit. And if there's one thing that I keep pointing out to you, Jesus is obsessed with this image of good fruit, and for good reason. It's something that we need to understand, that if we want to have that, we need to understand what it takes to get good fruit. And it takes more than just a desire to have it, because trust me, I desire to have an easy garden that I only have to plant in the spring and don't think about until September. Boy, wouldn't that be great. But that's not how life is. Right? See, here's the trouble. When Jesus was talking, and this is one of those things that I think is really, really important. Because as I said, I don't think that Christians like to hear this because it says a lot about how we waste our time. I've brought this up before when he was talking about the villages and going out and how there were people right next door that needed to hear, that wanted to hear, who were prepared and ready to hear. And you're sitting here wasting your time with the path and trying so desperately to cultivate and garden this path when there's good soil right next door. And it's not popular. It can be upsetting because those people that are the garden path, those people that are the rocky soil, those are people in our lives, those are people in our families, and those are people that we're close to. And that can really hurt for us to say, there's nothing I can do for them. And it's true, there's nothing you can do for them. But I want us to focus on the words of Jesus. There's a reason why Jesus quoted the book of Isaiah. He said, otherwise, at the end of that quote, in verse 10, chapter 6, verse 10 of Isaiah, otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. This is why I think it's so important for Christians especially to focus on this. There's nothing we can do. I cannot change a person's mind. Right? This is one of those things when you'll hear people say this about debate, for example. It's like, yeah, you're never going to persuade the person on the other side. And it's like debates are never for the person on the other side. It's for the audience that's listening. But one of the most important things that we can do as a Christian is constantly reflect over our own life and pray for those that we see who have allowed themselves to become jaded and calloused and hard to the good news. Because guess what? There's nothing you can do. You can't get into their heart and soften them. You can't break that up. You can love on them, pray for them, and you absolutely should. You absolutely should. But you're not going to force them into the kingdom of heaven. The only way you get to the kingdom of heaven is you come to that. You hear it with your own ears. You understand with your own heart. And you go, Jesus, I need you to soften my heart. I need you to heal me so that I can have that good soil, so that I can cultivate that good fruit, so that I too can have a bountiful harvest. Because here's the thing, one of the things that I think is really important, especially to think about the ones that are choked out with weeds. Anyone here ever find wild strawberries out in the grass and stuff like that? Yeah. What's different about wild strawberries versus the strawberries we get from the store? They're tiny. Why? Not just that. What's around them? Yeah, there's everything is around them, right? They got to compete for everything. They haven't been properly cultivated. They haven't been properly taken care of. In fact, that's how we got modern strawberries to get so big and juicy and delicious, is they were very carefully cultivated and cared for, and we nurtured it, and we created this whole new fruit. Same with raspberries, same with, most of our foods today. It was very careful botany that allowed us to create these fruits, but it takes very careful and very intentional work. And I want us to let that sink in, because that's the truth about Christianity as well. If you want God to come into your life, if you want all this fruit that you've heard about, if you want these things that God has called, that all these gifts and glories that God that you hear about from Christians and the things that God can offer you, guess what? It doesn't just come out of nowhere. First off, it takes time. Because as I know, I've planted, I was really happy actually this morning. I noticed a lot of my sprouts have come up because I only planted them last weekend. And so I'm seeing, okay, the cucumbers are up and the broccoli's up and still waiting on the tomatoes, but fingers are crossed. And so, I gotta wait, I gotta be patient. It takes time. But the other thing is, it takes a lot of work. And I think a lot of times, maybe for some people, they got some bad advertising. Right? They heard, if I come to Jesus, I'm going to get all this immediately. That's not how it happens. It comes through perseverance, hard work, getting down in the dirt with your hands and making it happen. And humility. Because here's the thing. If you, as I brought up the idea of the wild strawberries, yes, you can have a plant that is being choked out by the plants around it. You can have it a bunch of tomatoes growing up in a group of thorns, and you know what? You might get a couple of tomatoes off that plant, but you're not going to get a bountiful harvest. Your fruit is going to be severely lacking if you're not going to carefully prune back, keep away, and cultivate that plant. If you want to have a bountiful harvest, like, ask yourself, do you think a small bit of fruit is sufficient in your life? Or do you want to be a bountiful harvest to the people around you? Right? We all know what it takes to be saved. I've talked about this time and time again. And as we get to the close here, I know I told you, Rebecca, I might continue on from verse 24, but that's not going to happen. One of the things that I think is so important for us to understand is this. We have to make a decision. For many of us in this room, I know many of you have already made that decision. But once we make a decision, here's one of the things. Once you make a decision, it doesn't mean the hard work is over. John, once you decided you were going to fix that bearing on your truck, did it just get done? I purposely picked that bearing because I know how annoying they are to get on and off. And yeah, right? It's a lot of hard work. The work only begins when you make the decision. And that's okay. That's good because it helps you. It transforms you. And you know what's amazing is the joy it brings you when you can look back across your life, when you can look back across the months, years that you've spent dedicated to the Lord. And you can look back across and you can see the growth, not only in your own life, but the way that you've had an effect on the people around you. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not even going to happen in the first month. Yeah, you'll see some things. You're going to see some things starting to happen. But it takes years for the fruit to come in. And so why do we trust it? How do we know that what Jesus here is saying is true? As I've said to you before, because we believe not only that Jesus was alive, like this has been confirmed. I know there's going to be a handful of people out there that says, oh, Jesus never existed. No, it's nonsense. He was a real man. We know he died on the cross. The only leap of faith you have to ask yourself is, were all the eyewitnesses who said that they saw him resurrected, were they liars? Those hundreds of people that saw Jesus in those 40 days that he went around teaching after his resurrection, in those 40 days that he walked around this earth and proclaiming the good news of the Lord, was he lying? Were they lying about what they saw? Or were they telling the truth? Because they were telling the truth, I think that's a pretty good demonstration of someone that I ought to follow. If you can die and bring yourself back from the dead, if you are God just as you declared you were, if you did the things you did, if you said the things you said, and you believed it with such conviction that you went to the most painful and gruesome death that we have yet been able to outdo, then you know what? I believe him. And when he gives us this path, when he shows us the way, it shows us, you know what? Yeah, we need to be praying for the people around us, but we need to be taking care of ourselves as well. So that way, and we need to be constantly praying that Jesus would continue to heal hearts, heal people, soften hearts, and allow people to finally accept and receive the Spirit. Because guess what? There are people, just like Pharaoh, who hardened his own heart and rejected God outright, even though he knew God was there. It's not that he questioned whether or not God was real. He knew it, and he rejected him nonetheless. So let's not be like that. Let's be like Moses, who when confronted by the power of God said, you know what? Yeah, you're right. Your ways are better. You are greater than me. I'm going to trust in you.